The nice part of Pandas are all the pre-built functions and methods we can use to make our lives easier. If we have a CSV file that we want to read into Pandas to play around with, we can use the Read CSV method. Let's use our player info CSV file that's in our NBA stats CSV folder. This file contains all the player IDs and player names for NBA players since the 1991 season. So here we will be using our pd.readCSV method. There is a small callout to make when using our readCSV method, and that is referencing the path to the file. If the CSV were in the current working directory, we could call it directly like so. Passing in the file name, and again we would want to save this to a data frame. And if the player info CSV was in our current working directory, we could run this and it should work. But note, we get the error that player info CSV does not exist. So since it's in another folder, we have to tell Pandas this. That means we need to add the path to the file. So let's go up one level and then into our NBA stats CSV. And now we're saying go into our folder, go into the NBA stats CSV folder, and then find the player info CSV. And if we run it this time, it looks like it worked. We have loaded a CSV file into a Pandas data frame. And if we were to just look at the first 10 rows, it looks just like an Excel table, doesn't it? The numbers on the left are the indexes, and the column names on the top are chosen from the first row of the CSV file. Pandas will default to this action unless we tell it differently. When we load in the CSV, it's going to include all the rows and columns, and Pandas is going to use that first row as the header row and use those to create the columns. This is usually good, but sometimes we don't have the header rows in the CSV files. This means that first row, we don't want Pandas to take it and turn it into the column names. To prevent this, we just tell Pandas to ignore the first row, also known as the header row. We can do this by passing an argument in the header parameter, which we can see in our readCSV method by using Shift plus Tab. So if we use our pd.readCSV, and in it we hit Shift plus Tab, you'll see there is a header parameter. Now the infer means it's going to infer from the first row. So again, if we were to read in our file, our CSV file, and here we are going to use a different CSV file with no header that I created. And again, we now want to add in this header parameter, and we are going to set it equal to none. This is basically telling Pandas that that first row is not a header row, so don't use it to name the columns. So if we save this to a data frame and run it, and we print those first 5 columns, you'll see it's just going to default to using integers as the column names. We can always rename those columns later. If we want to load a CSV into a data frame and set a specific column as the index, we just need the name of that column to use as an argument in the index call parameter. Let's say we had all of our player info CSV data and we wanted to load it into a data frame and set the index as the player IDs. We could write the following: pd.readCSV, and again we need to tell it where to look, NBA stats CSV, player info, and again we're using the index call parameter, and we are going to use the player ID column name, so put it in parentheses, player ID, and again we need to save this to a data frame to inspect it. We run it, great, and let's just look at our first 5 rows. And you'll see the player ID is now the index. Within the Read CSV method, we could also decide to only load specific columns into the data frame if, for instance, we had more info than needed in the CSV. So let's say we had a CSV with a ton of our player data, but only wanted 2 columns in the data frame. We could do the pd.read CSV method. We need to tell it where to go find this file. And this one is called player general traditional per game data.csv. And what we're going to use is the usecols parameter, which takes in a Python list of the columns we want, which in this case would be player ID and season ID. And now if we save this to a data frame, we run it, and then we look at our first 5 rows, and there you have it. Just the player ID and season ID, even though this CSV file is made up of many, many columns. We were just telling Pandas to only use the columns we want. The catch is we need to know the column names beforehand. So I typically recommend loading in the entire data frame and then drop in the unnecessary columns instead. Great, on to the next.